The physician's boots echoed down the marble hallway like a judge departing the sentencing. Martha remained in the examination room, her mother's former music room, stripped of its harp and pianoforte, transformed into a sterile chamber of judgment, staring at the leather examination table she had just vacated. The white sheet was still wrinkled where her body had pressed into it, a ghost of her humiliation. She could still feel the cold instruments, the invasive pressure. Dr. Helmsworth's clinical fingers probing parts of her body that even her own hands had rarely touched. His assistant had held her wrist throughout, ostensibly to monitor her pulse, but truly to prevent her from fleeing. "You may dress, Miss Gray." The nurse's voice had been neither kind nor cruel, simply factual, as if Martha were a specimen being returned to its jar. Now, clothed again in her afternoon dress, Martha stood at the window overlooking the narrow garden of their Mayfair townhouse. October rain streaked the glass, turning the world beyond into watercolor smears of gray and brown. Appropriate, she thought distantly. Even the weather was mourning what she had lost, what she had never possessed to begin with. The door opened without ceremony. Lady Eleanor Gray entered with the measured steps of a woman who had already calculated her next move, processed her disappointment, and filed it away with all the other failures her daughter represented. She held a letter in one hand, though she did not look at it. Her eyes, blue and cold as winter ice, fixed on Martha with the assessment of an accountant reviewing a loss. "Sit," she said. Martha obeyed, lowering herself into the chair across from her mother's writing desk. The same chair where she had learned Latin declensions as a child, where she had been scolded for imperfect posture, where she had received the news that her father's debts had consumed most of their fortune. The chair of verdicts. Lady Eleanor remained standing, a tactical choice. Height was power in her mother's mathematics of control. "Dr. Helmsworth has provided his final assessment," she began, her voice carrying the detached precision she used for discussing servants' wages. "The malformation he suspected is confirmed. Your uterus is," she paused, selecting her words as one might select a fish at market, "insufficiently developed, inhospitable to conception. He states with 90% medical certainty that you will never carry a child to term." The words should have devastated her. Martha had known they were coming, had seen the doctor's expression shift during the examination from clinical interest to medical pity. But hearing them spoken aloud in her mother's drawing room, rendered in the same tone one might announce a change in dinner plans, transformed hypothesis into immutable truth. "I see," Martha whispered, because something needed to be said. "Do you?" Lady Eleanor's eyebrow arched. "Do you comprehend what this means? Your fourth season begins in 3 months. 3 months during which every matrimonial prospect in London will whisper that Martha Gray cannot provide an heir, cannot fulfill the singular purpose for which wives are acquired." Martha's hands tightened in her lap, twisting the fabric of her dress. "Surely not every gentleman of consequence requires heirs," her mother cut in, sharp as a blade. "Titles must pass, estates must transfer, bloodlines must continue. You are asking me to believe some romantic fool will marry you for affection alone? For your pleasant face and adequate watercolors?" She laughed, brittle. "You are not beautiful enough to be forgiven this defect, Martha. You are not charming enough. You are not wealthy enough. You are, in sum, unmarketable." The casual cruelty of it stole Martha's breath. She had always known her mother's love was conditional, dispensed in measured portions based on achievement and compliance. But to be declared unmarketable, like spoiled fruit at a stall, revealed the transactional nature of their relationship with a clarity that left her hollow. Then what am I to do? Martha asked, hating the tremor in her voice. Lady Eleanor moved to the window, her silk skirts whispering secrets. The rain had intensified, drumming against the glass like impatient fingers. Fortunately, she said, Providence has intervened where biology has failed. She withdrew the letter from her pocket, unfolding it with deliberate care. The paper was expensive, heavy stock. The seal, broken now, had been black wax pressed with a raven. Even from across the room, Martha could see the crest was old, noble, significant. The Duke of Mourningwell, Lady Eleanor announced, is seeking a wife. The name landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of dread through Martha's chest. Mourningwell. She knew the name, knew the whispers. The reclusive duke whose young wife had died. The estate in Dorset where no one visited. The man who had vanished from society and never returned. He is dying, her mother continued, studying the letter as if it were a favorable bank statement. Consumption, his solicitors believe. A year at most. He has no heir and no prospects of producing one in his condition. She looked up, and her eyes held something Martha had not seen in months. Satisfaction. He requires a wife of good breeding who will make no demands, who will expect nothing, who will... She smiled, thin as a razor, fit seamlessly into a household that acknowledges the futility of heirs. Understanding crept over Martha like frost spreading across glass. You mean to sell me to a dying man? I mean to salvage what can be salvaged, Lady Eleanor corrected. You will be a duchess, even if briefly. You will have a title, a position. And when he dies, as he inevitably will, you will be a wealthy widow, still young with a rank that supersedes your biological inadequacy. She returned to her desk, producing fresh paper and ink. His solicitors will call tomorrow to discuss settlements. You will comport yourself with appropriate gratitude. Gratitude? Martha's voice rose despite herself. For being traded like livestock to a man I have never met? For being exiled to some desolate estate to watch a stranger die? For being offered a future at all? Her mother's facade cracked, revealing the fury beneath. Did you imagine some gentleman would marry you out of kindness? Would overlook your barren womb because he admired your needlework? You are damaged goods, Martha. Accept that truth and be grateful someone will still purchase you, even at a discount. The room fell silent, except for the relentless rain. Martha felt something inside her. Some last fragile hope she had not acknowledged she still carried, finally break. Not shatter. Breaking implied violence, drama. This was quieter, a simple cessation, like a candle going out. When? She asked finally. The arrangements will proceed swiftly. Mourningwell does not have time for a lengthy courtship. Lady Eleanor sat, pulling the writing desk closer. You will be married by November's end. Quietly. His solicitors have requested discretion. Of course, Martha said hollowly. Cannot let society know he is so desperate as to marry a barren woman. Cannot let society know you are being disposed of, her mother corrected. The story will be a romantic one. A reclusive duke emerging from grief, a modest young woman capturing his heart. By the time you leave London, the gossip will be contained. Lies, then. A pretty fiction to cover the ugly transaction. Martha should have expected nothing less. Lady Eleanor began writing, her pen scratching across paper with the sound of Martha's future being drafted in ink and legal terms. You may go, she said without looking up. I will summon you when the solicitors arrive. Wear the gray dress. It makes you look appropriately demure." Martha stood on unsteady legs, moving toward the door like a woman walking through water. At the threshold, she paused. "Mother," she said quietly, "did you ever love me at all?" Lady Eleanor's pen stopped. For a moment, the only sound was rain against glass. Then she resumed writing. "I loved the daughter I expected you to be," she said. "The one who would make an advantageous match, secure our family's position, give me grandchildren to dote upon." The pen scratched on. "That daughter died this afternoon, along with Dr. Helmsworth's hope for your fertility. I am simply burying what remains." Martha closed the door softly behind her and climbed the stairs to her bedroom. Only when she was safely inside, door locked, curtains drawn, did she finally allow herself to weep. Not for the Duke of Mourningwell, not even for her barren womb, but for the girl she had been that morning, who had still believed she might be loved for something other than what her body could produce. That girl was gone now. Tomorrow the lawyers would come, and Martha Gray would begin her transformation into a transaction. My lovely family, if you are enjoying this tale, please like, share, subscribe, and tell me in the comments section where you are watching from. The carriage turned off the main road onto a private drive that disappeared into a tunnel of ancient oaks. Their branches met overhead, skeletal fingers interlaced against the November sky, blocking what little afternoon light remained. Martha pressed her hand against the cold window, watching civilization recede with each rotation of the wheels. She had been traveling for 6 hours from London, alone except for a lady's maid her mother had hired for propriety, a thin woman named Agnes who had not spoken more than a dozen words since their departure. The silence had been almost companionable at first, a relief after weeks of her mother's calculated cruelty. But as the miles accumulated and the landscape grew increasingly desolate, the quiet had transformed into something oppressive, as if they were traveling not to Dorset, but to the edge of the known world. The wedding had been that morning, 7 minutes in a registry office, witnessed by strangers paid to attend. No flowers, no breakfast, no kiss, even the perfunctory kind, just signatures and a ring that hung loose on her finger, sized for someone else's hand, someone else's life. The Duke had not attended his own wedding. Too ill for travel, Mr. Thornfield had explained with apologetic efficiency. A proxy had stood in his place, a second cousin whose name Martha had immediately forgotten. She had married a man represented by a stand-in, bound herself to a voice she had never heard, a face she had never seen. Perhaps he is already dead, she had thought during the ceremony, gripped by hysterical fear. Perhaps I am being sent to bury him. The carriage lurched over a rut, jolting Martha from her thoughts. Through the window, the oaks finally released them, and Mourningwell Estate materialized from the gloom like a ship emerging from fog. It was not the Gothic monstrosity she had imagined. No crumbling towers or gargoyles. Instead, it was a Jacobean manor of gray stone, elegant in its proportions, but utterly colorless, as if the house itself had surrendered to grief and drained of all vitality. Ivy climbed the walls like veins, and the windows, dozens of them, stared blankly across neglected grounds. The gardens had once been formal, she could see, but were now overgrown, geometry surrendering to wilderness. The architecture of sorrow, she thought. A house built for joy, now inhabited by its opposite. The carriage stopped before the main entrance. No servants appeared to greet them. Agnes descended first, her face carefully neutral, then turned to help Martha down. The November wind cut through Martha's traveling cloak, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and something else, the salt, sharp smell of the sea, though they were miles inland. The door opened. A butler emerged, elderly and stooped, moving with the careful deliberation of someone navigating pain. "Your Grace," he said, and it took Martha a moment to realize he was addressing her. "Welcome to Mourningwell. I am Corbett. We have been expecting you." "Your Grace." The title sat wrong in her ears, too large for someone who had been unmarketable goods only weeks ago. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thin against the wind. Corbett gestured toward the entrance. "His Grace is in the East Wing study. He asked that you be brought to him immediately upon arrival." Martha's stomach clenched. She had hoped for time to compose herself, to wash the travel dust from her face, to prepare for the moment when her phantom husband became real. But apparently, even that small mercy was too much to expect. The interior of Mourningwell matched its exterior. Beautiful bones beneath a pall of neglect. The entrance hall was grand, with a sweeping staircase and marble floors. But dust motes danced in the fading light from unwashed windows. Portraits lined the walls. Generations of Ravenels watching her procession with painted eyes. None of them smiled. Corbett led her through a series of corridors, each more shadowed than the last, until they reached a door of dark oak. He knocked softly. "Enter." The voice from within was male, cultured, and carried an edge of weariness that made it sound older than its years. Corbett opened the door and stepped aside. Martha walked into the study on legs that felt borrowed, unsteady. The room was lined with books from floor to ceiling, leather spines in shades of burgundy and forest green, gold lettering catching what little light penetrated the heavy curtains. A fire burned in the grate, offering warmth but little cheer. And beside the fire, in a high-backed chair, sat a man. Silas Ravenel, 9th Duke of Mourningwell, was younger than she expected. Perhaps 30, though illness had carved years into his face that time had not yet earned. He was pale, not the fashionable pallor of ladies who avoided the sun, but the translucent quality of someone whose body was consuming itself from within. Dark hair, longer than was fashionable, fell across a high forehead. His frame, though seated, suggested he had once been broader, stronger, before sickness had whittled him down to essentials. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Gray as a winter sea, they held an intelligence and sorrow so profound that meeting them felt like looking into a mirror she had not known existed. He studied her with the same intensity, not with the clinical assessment of her mother or the physicians, but with something closer to recognition. As if he saw not her barren womb or her modest dowry or her adequate face, but something deeper, something that matched the desolation in his own gaze. "Miss Gray," he said finally, then corrected himself with a slight, sardonic smile. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I am still learning to think of myself as a married man again." "As am I," Martha said, then flushed. "Learning to think of myself as married, I mean. Not as a man, obviously." The absurdity of her words hung in the air. Then, impossibly, the Duke laughed, a rough sound, as if his throat had forgotten how. "Please," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his. "Sit. You have had a long journey, and I have been a poor host, demanding your presence before you have even removed your cloak." Martha sat, grateful to have something to do with her trembling legs. Up close, she could see the toll of his illness more clearly. The shadows beneath his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands, the way his breath seemed to require conscious effort. "You are wondering if I will survive the winter," he said. Heat flooded her cheeks. "Your Grace, I would never—" "Please." He raised a hand, silencing her protest. "Let us not begin with polite fictions. Your mother informed my solicitors of your situation. I assume my solicitors informed your mother of mine." We are both too acquainted with clinical truth to pretend otherwise. The bluntness should have shocked her. Instead, it felt like relief. After weeks of euphemisms and careful language, here was someone willing to speak plainly about the realities that had bound them together. "Then I will be honest," Martha said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "I do not know why you chose me. Why any man in your position would willingly marry at all, let alone someone society has deemed defective." Something flickered across his face. Pain, perhaps, or memory. "I married because my solicitors insisted the estate requires a duchess, and I was tired of arguing. I chose you because Mr. Thornfield assured me you would expect nothing from this arrangement. No heirs, no performance of affection, no demands for a husband I cannot be." He leaned back in his chair, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "I thought we might at least spare each other the cruelty of false hope." Martha absorbed this, feeling the weight of his honesty. "And what am I to do here, in this house, with you?" "Whatever you wish," he said. "The estate is yours to explore. The library is extensive if you read. There are gardens, though they have been neglected." He paused, his gray eyes finding hers again. "I ask only that you do not expect me to play the part of a husband in anything but name. I have not the strength for performance." "And I have not the desire for it," Martha replied. "My mother made it clear I should be grateful merely for the title, that I should fade into your walls and wait quietly for widowhood." His expression darkened. "Your mother sounds remarkably similar to my physicians, both experts at reducing people to their failing parts." He was silent for a moment, staring into the fire. "My first wife died 3 years ago, in childbirth. The physicians had warned us that exertion might hasten my decline. They recommended separate bedrooms, clinical distance. We refused. We thought love was worth the risk." His voice dropped. "When she died, they called it providence, said her death had saved my life, as if I should be grateful to survive the woman I loved." Martha's throat tightened. She had arrived expecting a deathbed, a ghost. Instead, she had found someone whose grief matched her shame in depth and dimension. Two people hollowed out by different losses, left with the same essential emptiness. "I am sorry," she whispered. "As am I." He looked at her then, truly looked, and she saw something shift in his expression. Not desire, not even affection, but something like alliance. "We are both broken in ways that cannot be mended, Your Grace. Perhaps at least we can be broken in the same house without pretending otherwise." Outside, darkness had fallen completely. The fire crackled. And Martha realized that for the first time in months, she was not being asked to be anything other than what she was. Ruined, empty, honest. "Then that is what we shall be," she said. The Duke nodded, something like relief crossing his tired face. And in the gathering darkness of mourning, two strangers bound by society's verdict of their uselessness sat in companionable silence, beginning the strange work of learning to exist together. Martha woke to gray light filtering through unfamiliar curtains and the distant sound of the sea. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was. Forgot the marriage, the journey, the Duke with sorrow in his eyes. Then memory returned with the weight of the ring on her finger, and she remembered, mourning well. She was the Duchess now, mistress of this melancholy house. A maid had unpacked her trunk the night before while Martha lay sleepless in the Duchess's chambers. A suite of rooms decorated in faded rose and cream. Beautiful once, but now carrying the stale air of disuse. Everything bore the ghost of the previous duchess. A hairbrush still on the vanity, slippers beneath the bed, a half-finished embroidery frame in the corner. Martha had felt like an intruder sleeping in a dead woman's bed. Agnes appeared with morning tea and news delivered in her economical way. His Grace takes breakfast in his rooms, luncheon as well. Corbett says he rarely leaves the East Wing these days, except for brief walks when his strength permits. So she was to be alone then, rattling around this vast house while her husband slowly died in another wing entirely. It was, Martha supposed, exactly what she should have expected. What her mother had promised, a title in exchange for invisibility. She dressed in a simple day gown and wandered the house like a ghost herself, learning its geography. The morning room with its dusty pianoforte. The dining room set for 12, though clearly no guests had sat there in years. The portrait gallery where generations of Ravenels stared down with expressions ranging from stern to sorrowful. She paused before what must have been the late Duchess. A young woman with kind eyes and dark curls painted in the first bloom of marriage. Beautiful, beloved, dead at 23. By afternoon, Martha found herself in the conservatory at the back of the house. It had once been magnificent, a glass palace filled with exotic plants, but now half the panes were broken, letting in the November cold, and most of the plants had died or gone wild. A lemon tree struggled in the corner, its leaves yellowed. It seemed a perfect metaphor for mourning well itself, something lovely left to decay. She was examining the lemon tree, wondering if it could be saved, when Corbett appeared in the doorway. "Your Grace, His Grace requests your presence in the library, if you are amenable." Requests, not commands. The courtesy surprised her. The library occupied the entire south wing of the second floor. Martha had glimpsed it the previous evening, but had not truly seen it. Now, in afternoon light, it revealed itself as the heart of the house. 2 stories of books, with a gallery running the perimeter and tall windows overlooking the sea. The collection was extraordinary. Literature, philosophy, natural sciences, histories in multiple languages. This was not a gentleman's token library for show. This was a scholar's life work. Silas sat in a leather chair near the windows, wrapped in a heavy dressing gown despite the fire burning in the grate. He looked worse than he had the night before, paler, more drawn, as if the effort of meeting her had cost him reserves he could not spare. A book lay open in his lap, and several more were stacked on the table beside him, along with an untouched lunch tray. He looked up as she entered, and something in his expression shifted. Relief, perhaps, at having company, or simply distraction from pain. "Your Grace," he said, "thank you for coming. I hope Corbett did not interrupt anything important." "I was examining a dying lemon tree in your conservatory," Martha said. "So no, nothing that could not wait." A faint smile touched his lips. "Ah, that tree was my wife's favorite. She had it brought from Italy. I have not had the heart to let the gardeners remove it, though it has been failing for 2 years. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Please, sit. I promise not to expire dramatically and traumatize you." The dark humor startled a laugh from her. She sat, arranging her skirts, uncertain what was expected. Was this a formal audience? A duty call? "I imagine you are wondering what you are meant to do here," Silas said, as if reading her thoughts. "My solicitors likely painted a picture of gentle nursing, reading to the invalid, keeping him comfortable in his decline." "Something like that," Martha admitted. "I have nurses for comfort," he said. "Mrs. Hendricks manages my medications with the precision of a general. Dr. Bion, Mallory visits weekly to document my deterioration. What I do not have, he paused, choosing his words carefully, is someone to talk to who is not being paid to humor a dying man. Martha studied him. You want conversation? I want intellectual companionship, he corrected. I am losing my body by degrees. My lungs betray me. My strength fails. But my mind remains sharp, and I am going mad from isolation. He gestured to the books around them. I have read everything here twice over. I need fresh perspectives, arguments, someone who will tell me when my logic is flawed. You want a companion for your mind? Martha said slowly, understanding dawning. Not a nurse for your body. Precisely. He leaned forward slightly, and she saw a spark of intensity in those gray eyes that illness had not dimmed. Your mother may have sold you as a decorative nurse, but I am asking for something far more demanding. I want you to read with me, debate with me, challenge me. He paused. Can you do that? The question hung between them. Martha thought of her education, the languages her father had taught her before his death, the philosophy she had read in secret because her mother deemed it unfeminine, the scientific journals she had borrowed from her uncle's library. All that learning, dismissed as useless because it did not make her more marriageable. I was taught that intellectual women make poor wives, she said carefully. By the same people who taught that barren women are worthless? His tone was gentle but pointed. Forgive me, Your Grace, but I think we are past caring what such people think. Something loosened in Martha's chest. What are you reading? He held up the book, Darwin's recently published work on evolution. I am trying to reconcile natural selection with theology. The Church says God designed every creature with purpose. Darwin suggests purpose emerges from chaos and survival. Both cannot be fully true. Why not? Martha found herself leaning forward. Perhaps God designed the mechanism of chaos, set the rules by which purpose emerges. Silas's eyes widened slightly. You have read Darwin? My uncle kept a subscription to scientific journals. My mother thought I was reading ladies' magazines. She felt heat in her cheeks. I know it is not proper. It is perfect, he interrupted. Tell me, do you believe we are merely sophisticated animals, or something separate, specially created? And just like that, they were talking. Not with the careful politeness of strangers, but with the eager intensity of scholars who had found an unexpected peer. Martha found herself defending positions she had only half formed, sharpening her arguments against the whetstone of his counterpoints. He challenged her assumptions. She exposed the gaps in his logic. Time dissolved. When Corbett arrived with fresh tea, Martha was startled to see the windows had darkened. They had been talking for 3 hours. Silas noticed too. He sat back in his chair, and she could see the exhaustion the conversation had cost him. But there was also something else in his face, a vitality that had not been there before, color in his cheeks, light in his eyes. I have tired you, Martha said, guilty. You have reminded me I am still alive, he corrected. There is a difference. He accepted tea from Corbett with trembling hands. Will you come tomorrow? I want to discuss your theory about divine mechanism. I think it is flawed, but elegantly so. Martha smiled. My theory is not flawed. Your theology is simply too rigid. Then you must return to demonstrate my rigidity, he said. And there was warmth in his voice that had not been there before. Same time? Same time, she agreed. As she left the library, Martha realized something had shifted. She had arrived at Morningwell expecting to be invisible, ornamental, waiting quietly for widowhood. Instead, She had found something unexpected. A man who wanted her mind more than her womb, who valued her thoughts more than her fertility. In the Duchess's chambers that night, she did not feel like an intruder. She felt like someone who had finally found a place where her particular defects did not matter, where what she could not give was irrelevant compared to what she could. The next morning, she woke early and went to the library before being summoned. Silas was already there, a new stack of books beside him, waiting. He looked up as she entered and smiled. "I have been thinking about your argument," he said. "You are still wrong, but I am prepared to be convinced." Martha laughed and sat down across from him. And in the library of Morningwell, surrounded by books and fire and the sound of the distant sea, two people society had discarded began building something neither had expected. Not romance, not yet, but recognition, the rarest gift of all. 3 weeks into her marriage, Martha stood in the ruined conservatory with dirt under her fingernails and purpose in her chest for the first time in months. The decision to save the lemon tree had been impulsive, born from a morning when Silas had been too weak for their library sessions and the house felt too large, too empty, too much like a mausoleum waiting for its final occupant. She had wandered to the conservatory seeking distraction and found herself staring at the struggling tree, its yellowed leaves trembling in the draft from broken panes. Still alive, she had thought. Barely. But still trying. The metaphor was too obvious to ignore. She had found the head gardener and weathered man named Griggs, who managed the grounds with a skeleton crew, most of his former staff dismissed when the late Duchess died and the Duke withdrew from the world. Griggs had been skeptical when she asked about saving the conservatory. "Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but it would take considerable work. The glazing needs replacing, the heating system is broken, half the soil beds are diseased. His Grace has not shown interest in the conservatory since." He had stopped, tactful. Since his wife died. Since grief had turned everything green and growing into a painful reminder of loss. "Then it is time someone took interest," Martha had said with more confidence than she felt. "I want the broken panes replaced first. Then we will assess what can be saved and what must be cleared away." That had been 2 weeks ago. Now the conservatory was transformed from tomb to surgery, still damaged, still in process, but alive with potential. The broken glass had been replaced, letting in clean November light. The heating system, after considerable coaxing from Griggs's nephew, rumbled back to life. And Martha, dressed in her oldest gown with an apron borrowed from the kitchen, spent her mornings covered in soil, learning the difference between death and dormancy. The lemon tree, it turned out, was not dying. It was merely starved, root-bound in soil depleted of nutrients, desperate for repotting and feeding. With Griggs's guidance, they had carefully transferred it to a larger container with fresh earth mixed with compost and sand. Within days, the yellowing had stopped. Within a week, new growth appeared at the tips of branches, tender and green as hope. Martha was pruning dead wood from a jasmine vine when she heard the footsteps behind her. She turned to find Silas standing in the conservatory doorway, leaning heavily on a walking stick, wrapped in a greatcoat despite the warmth from the restored heating pipes. She straightened quickly, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance, hair escaping its pins, dirt smudged across her cheek, hands stained brown from soil. "Your Grace, I did not expect. You should not have come down the stairs." "I heard hammering," he said, his voice carrying a note of wonder. "For 2 weeks, hammering and voices and activity. I finally demanded Corbett tell me what military operation was being conducted in my conservatory." His gray eyes swept the space, taking in the repaired glass, the cleared beds, the plants in various stages of resurrection. "You did this?" Martha felt suddenly defensive. "You said I could do as I wished, that the estate was mine to explore. If I have overstepped—" Overstepped? He moved further into the room, his steps careful but purposeful. He stopped before the lemon tree, reaching out to touch one of the new leaves with trembling fingers. "Catherine planted this tree the summer we were married. She said every house should have something that bears fruit, even in winter, especially in winter." His voice roughened. "I could not bear to look at it after she died. Could not tend it. I let it suffer because I was suffering." "It is not your fault," Martha said quietly. "Grief is not a garden. You cannot simply will things to grow." He looked at her then, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Yet you are willing things to grow. Here, in this place I had given up on." "I am willing myself to grow," Martha corrected before she could stop herself. The truth emerged unbidden, raw. "I have spent months being told I am barren, useless, empty. But plants do not care about my womb. They grow if I tend them properly. They respond to care. They give me something to nurture when I have been told I cannot nurture anything that matters." The words hung between them. More honest than she had intended, Silas was silent for a long moment, still touching the lemon leaf as if it were something precious and fragile. "You matter," he said finally. "What you are doing here matters. Not because it produces fruit or heirs or anything society deems valuable, but because it is creation in the face of decay. Life in a house that has been dying for 3 years." He turned to face her fully. "You are not barren, Martha. You are a gardener in winter, coaxing life from dormant things. There is a difference." Her throat tightened. No one had called her by her given name since the wedding. The intimacy of it, coupled with his words, threatened to undo something in her chest she had carefully walled off. "The conservatory was Catherine's domain," he continued, his voice softer now. "After she died, I closed it. Told myself I was preserving it as she left it. But I was really just abandoning it, letting it rot because I could not bear to see it thrive without her." He looked around the space again, and Martha saw grief and gratitude warring in his expression. "You have given it back its purpose, not as a shrine to the past, but as a living thing with a future." "I did not mean to intrude on her memory," Martha said. "You are not intruding. You are honoring it." He moved to a bench near the windows and lowered himself onto it with visible relief. "Catherine would have liked you. She had no patience for ornamental women. She wanted companions who could argue philosophy and get their hands dirty." A faint smile touched his lips. "She once spent an entire dinner party debating agricultural reform with my uncle while covered in potting soil she had forgotten to wash off. My mother was scandalized." Martha found herself smiling. "She sounds formidable." She was. The smile faded. "Loving her was the bravest thing I ever did. Losing her was the worst. I have spent 3 years trying to decide if the joy was worth the grief." He looked at Martha. "I still do not know the answer." "Perhaps there is no answer," Martha said, moving to sit beside him on the bench. "Perhaps love and loss are not equations to balance. Perhaps they simply are." They sat in silence, surrounded by the smell of fresh earth and growing things. Outside, the November sky was iron gray, but inside the conservatory, warmth and light created a pocket of possibility. Martha could hear Griggs working in the far corner, clearing a bed of dead geraniums. "I have been thinking," Silas said after a while, "about your theory of divine mechanism. How God might work through chaos rather than in spite of it." "And?" Martha prompted. "I think you may be right." He gestured to the conservatory around them. This place was chaos. Broken glass and dying plants and 3 years of neglect. You did not impose perfect order on it. You worked with what was here, saved what could be saved, cleared away what was truly dead, let new things emerge in the spaces created by loss. He turned to look at her. Perhaps that is how God works in lives too. Not erasing the broken parts, but growing something new alongside them. Martha felt something shift in her chest, like ice beginning to crack. "I am not certain I believe in God anymore," she admitted. "Not after the physicians. Not after my mother declared my barren womb evidence of divine judgment." "Your mother is a fool," Silas said bluntly, "and the physicians are fools. And anyone who mistakes biology for morality is a fool." He reached over and took her soil-stained hand in his own trembling one. The gesture was not romantic. It was the clasp of one wounded person to another. "You are not divine judgment, Martha. You are evidence that worth has nothing to do with what we produce and everything to do with what we tend." Tears pricked her eyes. She blinked them back, afraid to let them fall, afraid that once started, they might never stop. "You barely know me. I know you saved a tree I had given up on. I know you argue theology with passion and precision. I know you choose creation over resignation." He squeezed her hand gently. "That is enough to know you are not what they said you were." They sat together as the afternoon light shifted, turning the conservatory into a cathedral of glass and green. And Martha felt something she had not felt since Dr. Helmsworth's examination. Something tender and new, pushing up through the frozen ground of her grief. Not happiness. Not yet. But the first fragile shoot of hope. That perhaps she was not barren after all. Perhaps she had simply been planted in the wrong soil, told to grow into the wrong shape, measured by the wrong season. Here, in this house of sorrow, with this dying man who saw her clearly, she was finally taking root. And against all odds, beginning to bloom. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in early December, delivered with the regular post and left on the breakfast tray. Martha now took in the morning room, rather than alone in her chambers. The seal was her mother's. Crimson wax pressed with the gray family crest, and Martha's stomach clenched at the sight of it. She had not heard from Lady Eleanor since the wedding. 6 weeks of blessed silence. She should have known it could not last. The letter was brief, written in her mother's precise hand. "Martha, I trust you are conducting yourself appropriately. Lord Pemberton's widow has written to say the Duke appeared at the village church last Sunday, looking skeletal. She estimates you have 3 months at most before widowhood. Do not embarrass the family with excessive mourning when the time comes. A year of black, then you may return to London with your title intact. We shall find you a second match. Perhaps to someone less particular about heirs, now that you bear a duchy. Your brother sends his regards. Mother." Martha read it twice, each word a small violence. 3 months at most, discussed with the casual certainty of a stock report. Do not embarrass the family, as if her grief, should she feel any, would be mere performance requiring management. She was still holding the letter when Silas appeared in the doorway of the morning room. He rarely ventured this far from the east wing, and she could see the effort it cost him. His breathing labored, one hand braced against the doorframe. "Forgive the intrusion," he said. "Corbett mentioned you had received correspondence from London. I wanted to ensure it was not bad news." Martha looked at him, truly looked. He was thinner than when she had arrived, his cheekbones sharp beneath pale skin. But there was color in his face from their library discussions, light in his eyes from their debates about philosophy and science and literature. He was dying, yes, but he was also living more fully than he had in 3 years. The contradiction of it, the terrible, beautiful contradiction, made her throat tight. "My mother writes to inform me you have 3 months left," she said, her voice flat. "Lord Pemberton's widow saw you at church and made her medical assessment. Mother advises I prepare for efficient widowhood and a second marriage to capitalize on my new rank." Silas went very still. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. 3 months. How generous. Last year, Dr. Mallory gave me 6 weeks. The year before, the village physician claimed I had days. He moved into the room, lowering himself into the chair across from her with visible relief. "I have been dying for 7 years, Martha. I am apparently very poor at it." "She has already planned my mourning schedule," Martha continued, the absurdity of it breaking through her composure. 1 year of black. Then back to the marriage market, a duchess now, more valuable despite my defective womb. "Of course," Silas said darkly, "because you are not a person. You are an asset to be managed, a title to be leveraged." He reached across the table and took the letter from her hand, reading it with an expression that grew progressively harder. When he finished, he set it down with deliberate care. "Your mother is a mercenary in silk, and I say that as someone whose own mother stopped visiting because my continued survival was an embarrassment to the family legacy." Martha looked up sharply. "What?" "After Catherine died, my mother came to mourning well once. She stood in my sick room and told me that if I could not provide heirs, the least I could do was die efficiently so my cousin could inherit and restore the line." His voice was steady, but his hands trembled. "She said my illness was God's judgment for marrying unsuitably, that Catherine's death was Providence removing the obstacle to a proper match. She offered to find me a robust young woman of excellent breeding stock who could, and I quote, nurse me through my final weeks while providing the duchy its future." "Dear God," Martha whispered. "I had her removed from the estate," Silas continued. "Told Corbett she was never to be admitted again. She has not written since. I assume she is waiting for news of my death so she can attend the funeral and weep prettily about her poor, tragic son." The bitterness in his voice was corrosive. "We are both commodities to them, Martha. You are a womb that failed its function. I am a title that failed to perpetuate itself. They have measured us, found us wanting, and written us off as losses." The raw honesty of it pierced something in Martha's chest. She had spent weeks building companionship with this man, debating ideas, tending gardens, creating small pockets of purpose in their shared exile. But they had danced around the central truth of their situation, the fact that both of them had been discarded by the people who should have loved them most. "I am tired," she said suddenly, the words emerging unbidden. "I am so tired of being measured by what I cannot give, of having my worth calculated in heirs and breeding potential and market value." "As am I," Silas said. "Tired of physicians prodding me like a specimen. Tired of being a disappointment for continuing to breathe. Tired of this weight." He pressed a hand to his chest, of knowing I have failed every expectation that matters to my family. They sat in silence, the December morning light pale and cold through the windows. Outside, the gardens Martha had begun restoring were dormant for winter, waiting for spring that Silas might not live to see. "I have a proposal," Silas said finally. "Rather, a proposition. A pact, if you will. Martha met his eyes. I am listening. We stop living for their expectations, he said. Your mother's timeline for my death, my mother's demands for heirs, society's requirement that we perform appropriate shame for our biological failures. He leaned forward, intensity burning in his gray eyes. We have been sentenced to this exile together. Let us make it ours. Not a waiting room for death or widowhood, but a life we choose deliberately. What does that mean? Martha asked, though something in her chest was already responding, unfurling like one of her greenhouse plants toward light. It means we stop apologizing for what we cannot give and start celebrating what we can, Silas said. You want to restore the gardens? Restore them. Every greenhouse, every bed, every inch of ground. I want to finish my manuscript on natural philosophy. I write it, even if I never live to see it published. We read what we wish, argue what we wish, create what we wish. His voice grew fierce. We live, Martha, fully, deliberately, not for duty or dynasty or anyone's approval, but for each other, for ourselves. The audacity of it took her breath. They will call it selfish? Let them, he said. They have already called us failures. What more can they take from us? Martha thought of her mother's letter, calculating her mourning period like a business expense. Thought of the physicians who had declared her barren with clinical detachment. Thought of all the voices that had told her what she was worth, what she owed, what she could never be. And she thought of the lemon tree, blooming now in the conservatory despite everyone saying it was dying. Thought of the library debates that left her energized rather than depleted. Thought of mornings in the greenhouse, hands in soil creating life in the face of decay. I accept your pact, she said. Silas smiled, a real smile, bright and almost boyish despite his illness. Then we are agreed. No more living for their timelines. No more measuring ourselves by their metrics. No more duty, Martha added. No more dynasty. Just us, she said, living deliberately in our heirless house. Our heirless house, he repeated, as if tasting the words. I rather like that. A house freed from the burden of posterity. A house where we can simply be. He reached across the table and offered his hand. Martha took it, his skin paper-thin and trembling, but his grip firm. They shook on it like business partners, like co-conspirators, like two people making a bargain with fate. To living, Silas said. To living, Martha echoed. And in that moment, something fundamental shifted between them. They were no longer strangers bound by convenience, no longer patient and nurse, no longer even simply companions. They were allies in a quiet revolution. Two people who had been told they were not enough, choosing to be everything to each other instead. Later that afternoon, Martha took her mother's letter to the library fire and fed it to the flames. She watched the paper curl and blacken, the precise handwriting dissolving into ash. Silas sat in his chair nearby, working on his manuscript, occasionally reading passages aloud for her opinion. This section on adaptation, he said. Does it make sense? Or am I becoming too philosophical? Martha left the fireplace and came to read over his shoulder. You are assuming your readers understand the difference between adaptation and mutation. Perhaps define terms first? Brilliant, he murmured, making notes. What would I do without you? Write in circles and confuse your readers, she said. He laughed, and the sound filled the library like light. Outside, winter settled over Morningwell. But inside, in their airless house, two people society had declared useless were building something more valuable than any dynasty. They were building a life worth living, on their own terms, for each other. And that, they decided, was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Winter gave way to early spring with a hesitancy that matched Martha's own cautious hope. The gardens were waking, crocuses pushing through the last patches of snow, the lemon tree in the conservatory heavy with small green fruit. And Silas, against all medical predictions, was still alive, not thriving precisely. There were bad days when he could not leave his bed, when his breathing rattled like dry leaves, when Martha sat beside him, reading aloud until he fell into fitful sleep. But there were also good days, mornings in the library, afternoons walking the gardens with careful steps, evenings debating philosophy by the fire. He had not died in 3 months, as her mother predicted, had not faded quietly into his sick room. He had impossibly stabilized. The sea air, Dr. Mallory said during his weekly visit, clearly perplexed. Or perhaps the reduction in stress. Something has arrested the decline. Martha knew what it was, even if the doctor did not. It was purpose. It was intellectual companionship. It was living for themselves rather than dying for duty. The airless pact had given them both permission to simply exist. And existence, it turned out, was sustaining. So she was surprised when Silas summoned her to the Duchess's chambers on a bright March morning, a room she still occupied but had never fully claimed as her own. Corbett stood outside the door with an expression of barely contained satisfaction. "His Grace has arranged something, Your Grace," he said cryptically. "If you would?" Martha entered to find the room transformed. The curtains had been drawn back, flooding the space with spring light. And spread across every surface, the bed, the chaise, the dressing table, were gowns. Dozens of them. Silks and velvets in jewel tones, day dresses in soft muslins, evening gowns with intricate beading that caught the light like water. Silas stood by the window, leaning on his walking stick, watching her reaction with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What is this?" Martha asked. "Your wardrobe," he said simply. "Or rather, what your wardrobe should have been." He gestured to the gowns. "Your mother sent you here with 4 dresses, all in shades of gray and brown. Mourning colors for a woman she had already buried. I thought it time you had something different." Martha moved to the nearest gown, a day dress in deep emerald silk that would bring out the green in her gray-green eyes. The fabric was exquisite, the cut modern. "Silas, this is too much." "It is not nearly enough," he interrupted. "Come, look properly." He led her to the dressing table where a mahogany box sat open, revealing jewelry that made her gasp, not the flashy pieces her mother favored, all oversized gems meant to broadcast wealth. These were refined, a sapphire pendant on a delicate chain, pearl earrings, a bracelet of worked gold that looked like intertwined vines. "These were Catherine's," Silas said quietly. "She would have wanted them worn, not locked away gathering dust." She had no patience for sentiment that preserved things into uselessness. He lifted the sapphire pendant, the stone catching the light. This was her favorite. She wore it the night I proposed. Said it reminded her of deep water, mysterious and full of life. Martha's throat tightened. "I cannot take her jewelry." "You are not taking it. I am giving it to you." He set the pendant down and turned to face her fully. "Martha, you have spent 4 months in this house transforming it from a tomb into a home. You saved gardens I had abandoned. You challenged ideas I had calcified around. You made me want to live when I had resigned myself to dying." His voice roughened. "You deserve to be adorned, to be celebrated, to see yourself as something other than what your mother's mirror reflected." My mother's mirror showed me exactly what I am, Martha said, old pain rising. Plain, barren, unmarketable. Your mother's mirror was a liar, Silas said with sudden fierceness. It showed you what she wanted to see, a failed investment, a defective commodity. But that is not what you are. He gestured around the room. These gowns, these jewels, they are not meant to transform you. They are meant to reflect what was always present. Intelligence, strength, grace, beauty that has nothing to do with your womb and everything to do with your spirit. Martha felt tears prick her eyes. Why? She whispered. Why does this matter to you? Silas was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. Because I know what it is to be looked at and only seen as a failing body, to have your worth reduced to what you cannot give. He moved closer, each step deliberate. When I look at you, Martha, I do not see a barren woman. I see the person who saved my lemon tree, who argues theology with passion, who gets dirt under her nails, coaxing life from frozen ground. That is what I want the world to see. What you should see when you look in the mirror. The world will not see that, Martha said. They will see a barren duchess married to a dying duke. They will whisper and calculate and wait for the inevitable. Then we shall prove them wrong, Silas said. Both of us. I am supposed to be dead. You are supposed to be invisible. Instead, we shall return to London and show them what we have become. Martha's head snapped up. Return to London? In May, he confirmed. For the season. Dr. Mallory says I am stable enough for travel if we take it slowly. And I find I am tired of hiding in Dorset like a shameful secret. Something fierce entered his expression. You have given me back my life, Martha. The least I can do is give you the society you were denied. Not as your mother's failed daughter, but as my duchess, my partner, my equal. I do not need society, Martha protested. I have been happy here, with the gardens, with our debates, with... She stopped, heat rising to her cheeks. With you. The admission hung between them. Silas's expression softened into something that made her heart stutter. And I with you, he said quietly. Which is precisely why I want to show the world what they discarded. Your mother called you unmarketable. London whispered you were barren and useless. I want to walk into those drawing rooms with you on my arm, vital, brilliant, beautiful, and let them choke on their judgments. This is about revenge? Martha asked. This is about recognition, he corrected. You have spent your life being overlooked, dismissed, reduced to your reproductive capacity. I want you to be seen fully. Celebrated completely. He picked up the sapphire pendant again, holding it out to her. Will you let me try? Will you trust me to reflect back to you what I see when I look at you? Martha took the pendant with trembling hands. The sapphire was cool and heavy, the chain delicate. She had never owned anything so fine, had never imagined herself worthy of such adornment. I am afraid, she admitted. Of what? That I will disappoint you. That I will be exactly what they always said, plain and barren and insufficient. That these beautiful things will only highlight what I lack. Silas reached out and tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. You could never disappoint me, Martha. You have already exceeded every hope I had when I married you. I expected a nurse. I found a companion. I expected duty. I found partnership. I expected to die alone. Instead, I am living, truly living, for the first time in 3 years. His thumb brushed her cheek, catching a tear she had not realized had fallen. The gesture was tender, intimate, and something shifted in the air between them. A recognition of feelings neither had named, but both had been nurturing like seeds in winter soil. "Try on the emerald gown," he said softly. "Let me see you as I see you." Martha nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Silas withdrew to give her privacy, and Agnes appeared to help her dress. The emerald silk slid over her skin like water, the cut modern and elegant, showing her figure to advantage. Agnes arranged her hair in a softer style than she had worn in months, letting curls frame her face. The sapphire pendant settled against her throat like it had been made for her. When she emerged, Silas was waiting in the sitting room. He looked up and went utterly still, his expression transforming into something that made her feel suddenly, powerfully seen. "That," he said, his voice rough, "that is what I see when I look at you." Martha turned to the full-length mirror and for the first time in her life saw someone she did not recognize. Not plain, not invisible, but a woman of quiet elegance and unexpected beauty, the kind that came not from perfect features, but from being truly, completely herself. "Different mirrors," she whispered, understanding finally. "Show different truths?" "Yes," Silas said, coming to stand behind her, their reflections merging in the glass. "Your mother's mirror showed you as lacking. This one shows you as whole. Both cannot be true." Martha met his eyes in the mirror. "Which do I believe?" "The one," he said softly, "that lets you bloom." And looking at herself in emerald silk and sapphires, standing beside a man who saw her worth when no one else had, Martha finally believed that perhaps she was not the barren, broken thing her mother had declared. Perhaps she had simply needed different soil, different light, a different mirror, to reflect what had been present all along. The Ravenel townhouse on Grosvenor Square had been shuttered for 3 years, dust sheets covering furniture like shrouds, silence thick as grief in every room. But in the week before their arrival, Silas had sent staff ahead to air it out, to restore it to life. When their carriage pulled up on a bright May afternoon, the windows gleamed and the doors stood open in welcome. London had not expected them. The dying Duke and his barren bride emerging from their Dorset exile into the height of the season. It was unprecedented, scandalous, delicious. Within hours of their arrival, calling cards began appearing on the silver tray in the entrance hall. Lady Pemberton, the Duchess of Rothwell, Lord and Lady Ashford, all curious, all eager to witness firsthand whether the rumors were true, whether the Duke of Mourningwell was truly recovered or merely making a final, tragic appearance before his inevitable demise. Martha stood in the drawing room that first evening, adjusting the sapphire pendant at her throat with nervous fingers. She wore one of the new gowns, silk the color of twilight, elegant without being ostentatious. Agnes had arranged her hair in the softer style they had perfected at Mourningwell, and in the mirror, Martha barely recognized herself. Not because she looked different, precisely, but because she carried herself differently. 5 months of being valued for her mind rather than her womb had straightened her spine, lifted her chin. She no longer moved like a woman trying to disappear. "You are radiant," Silas said from the doorway. He wore evening dress, perfectly tailored to accommodate his thin frame, and though he still carried his walking stick and moved with careful deliberation, there was vitality in his face that defied every death sentence the physicians had pronounced. "Are you ready?" "No," Martha admitted, "but I suspect I never will be." They were attending Lady Rothwell's salon, a gathering of London's intellectual elite where poets and philosophers mixed with the aristocracy. A gentler introduction to society than a ball, but still daunting. Still a stage where Martha would be scrutinized, measured, found wanting. The carriage ride was brief. Silas held her hand the entire way, his thumb tracing circles on her palm in a gesture that had become familiar over the past months. Comforting. Grounding. "Remember," he said quietly, "you are not the woman who left London in November. You are not what your mother declared you. You are my Duchess, my partner, my equal." "Your equal who cannot give you heirs," Martha said, old fear rising. "My equal who gave me back my life," he corrected. "That is worth more than any dynasty." Lady Rothwell's residence blazed with light and conversation. They were announced at the drawing-room entrance, the Duke and Duchess of Mourningwell, and the room fell silent. Every head turned, every eye assessed. Martha felt the weight of their stares like a physical thing. Saw the shock register as they took in Silas, pale but upright, clearly alive despite the rumors of his imminent demise. Saw the curiosity as they examined her, this unknown bride he had chosen in secret. This woman no one had expected to see, adorned in sapphires and silk. Lady Rothwell recovered first, sweeping forward with practiced grace. "Your Grace, what a delightful surprise. We had heard you were in town, but hardly dared hope you would attend." She took Silas's hand warmly, then turned to Martha with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. "And the new Duchess? How lovely to finally meet you. Your husband's letters have spoken of you with such admiration." Martha blinked. "Letters?" "Oh yes," Lady Rothwell said. "Silas has been corresponding with our natural philosophy circle all winter. His observations on Darwin's theories have generated considerable debate. He mentioned his wife was providing invaluable insights." She leaned in conspiratorially. "Between you and me, half the gentlemen refused to believe a woman could argue theology so effectively. I cannot wait to prove them wrong." Something warm unfurled in Martha's chest. Silas had been writing about her, sharing her ideas, presenting her not as his barren bride but as his intellectual companion. The evening unfolded like a dream. Lady Rothwell introduced them to poets and scholars, philosophers and reformers. Conversations ranged from natural selection to social reform, from art to agriculture. And Martha, who had spent years hiding her learning behind appropriate feminine silence, found herself debating freely, her ideas welcomed rather than dismissed. "Your Grace makes an excellent point about adaptation," a professor from Cambridge said, nodding thoughtfully. "I had not considered the role of environment versus inheritance. You must read Lamarck's latest." "I have," Martha said, "though I find his conclusions about acquired characteristics questionable. Surely Darwin's mechanism of natural selection better explains." They were off, arguing theory with an enthusiasm that drew a small crowd. Silas stood slightly apart, watching her with an expression that made her heart stutter. Pride, admiration, something deeper she did not dare name. It was perfect, too perfect, which was why she should have expected her mother. Lady Eleanor Grey arrived fashionably late, her entrance timed for maximum impact. She swept into the drawing room in burgundy silk, pearls gleaming at her throat like teeth, her eyes scanning the crowd with predatory precision. When her gaze landed on Martha, something flickered across her face, surprise, quickly masked by calculation. She did not approach directly. That was not her method. Instead, she positioned herself near a cluster of influential matrons and began speaking in a voice just loud enough to carry. "Yes, I was as shocked as anyone to see Martha here. she said to Lady Pemberton, her tone dripping with concerned maternal affection. After everything with the physicians, I thought she would prefer the quiet of the country. But Morningwell insisted, and what could I do? A dying man's wishes must be honored. Martha felt the words like a slap. Across the room, conversations faltered as ears pricked up. "The physicians?" Lady Pemberton prompted, clearly hungry for gossip. "Oh, you have not heard?" Lady Eleanor's voice carried perfectly. "My poor daughter was examined most thoroughly before the marriage. A medical necessity, you understand, given the Duke's precarious health. The verdict was quite definitive. Barren, I am afraid. A malformation of the womb. The doctors gave it a 90% certainty." The room's temperature seemed to drop. Martha felt every eye turned toward her, reassessing. No longer the intriguing new Duchess with unexpected intellectual depth. Now the barren woman, the defective bride. Of course, it suited Morningwell's purposes perfectly, Lady Eleanor continued, her smile sharp. A dying man with no hope of heirs, a daughter with no hope of providing them. An economical arrangement. Though I do worry what will happen when he inevitably passes. A barren widow duchess is a rather awkward commodity on the marriage market. Martha's hands clenched in her skirts. Heat flooded her face, shame and fury warring in her chest. This was her mother's revenge, for choosing life at Morningwell over invisible suffering in London, for daring to be happy when she had been declared broken. She felt Silas move before she saw him. He crossed the room with surprising speed despite his walking stick, positioning himself beside Martha with the protective instinct of a soldier entering battle. "Lady Grey," he said, his voice cutting through the whispers like a blade. "How kind of you to share such intimate medical details about my wife in a public drawing room. I am certain Lady Rothwell's guests are fascinated by the state of the Duchess's womb." The sarcasm was withering. Several people had the grace to look embarrassed. Lady Eleanor's smile tightened. "I merely thought to explain." "You thought to humiliate," Silas interrupted. "To reduce my wife to her reproductive capacity because you cannot bear to see her thriving beyond your control." He drew Martha closer, his arm around her waist, a clear declaration. "But you have miscalculated, madam. You assume society values heirs above all else. Perhaps in your mercenary circles that is true. But in rooms like this," he gestured to the assembled company, "intelligence is prized. Character is valued, and my wife possesses both in abundance." "Your Grace," Lady Pemberton said, clearly uncomfortable. "No one is judging." "Are you not?" Martha said suddenly, finding her voice. She stepped forward, meeting her mother's eyes directly. "You have just been informed I am barren, that my womb is malformed and useless. Are you not, even now, recalculating my worth? Wondering what purpose a woman serves if she cannot provide heirs?" The silence was absolute. "I will tell you what purpose," Martha continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I restore neglected gardens. I debate natural philosophy with scholars. I read 5 languages and argue theology with passion. I brought a dying man back to life through companionship and intellectual partnership. I am a duchess, a gardener, a scholar, and a wife." She turned to face the room fully. "And if my worth is diminished in your eyes because I cannot bear children, then your eyes are as flawed as my mother's mirror." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Lady Rothwell began to clap, slow, deliberate applause that built as others joined in. Not everyone. Some faces remained shocked, scandalized. But enough to matter. "Brilliantly said, Your Grace," Lady Rothwell declared. "And now I simply must introduce you to Professor Hartley, He has been arguing that women lack the rational capacity for scientific thought. I believe you will prove excellent evidence to the contrary. The spell broke. Conversation resumed, and Martha found herself swept back into debate, surrounded by people who wanted to discuss her ideas rather than her womb. But across the room, Lady Eleanor stood alone, her face a mask of cold fury. She had tried to reclaim control, and Martha, finally, had refused to be controlled. The invitation arrived 3 days after Lady Rothwell's salon, delivered by a footman in the Grey family livery. Martha recognized her mother's stationery before she even broke the seal. Heavy cream paper, ostentatious gold edging, the kind of extravagance Lady Eleanor used to broadcast status she could barely afford. You will attend dinner Thursday next, 8 o'clock. We have matters to discuss. Mother. Not a request, a summons. Martha's first instinct was to refuse, to send the footman back with polite regrets. But something in her had shifted since the salon. She had spent years allowing her mother to control the narrative of her worth, accepting pronouncements of her inadequacy without challenge. The time for silence had ended. I am going, she told Silas that evening as they sat in his study, her reading aloud from his latest manuscript while he made notes. He looked up, concern immediate in his gray eyes. You do not have to. You owe her nothing. I owe myself this, Martha corrected. She has spent my entire life telling me what I am, who I should be, what I am worth. I need to tell her, finally, that she was wrong. Silas studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then I am coming with you. You do not need to. I am coming, he repeated, brooking no argument. You faced her alone for 22 years. You will not face her alone again. Thursday arrived with unseasonable rain, the kind of cold spring storm that turned London streets to rivers of mud. The grey townhouse in Bloomsbury looked smaller than Martha remembered, shabbier. Or perhaps she had simply grown accustomed to Grosvenor Square's elegance, to rooms that spoke of old wealth rather than desperate gentility. The butler, the same man who had served since Martha's childhood, opened the door with something like relief in his aged eyes. Miss Martha, he said, then corrected himself quickly. Your Grace, forgive me. It has been many months. It is good to see you, Jeffries, Martha said warmly, and meant it. They were shown to the formal dining room, a space Martha associated with her father's rare dinner parties, before his death and the revelation of his debts. The table was set for 4, her mother at the head, 2 places on either side. The 4th guest had not yet arrived. Lady Eleanor stood as they entered, her expression carefully neutral. She wore black silk despite being years out of mourning, the color making her look severe, judicial. Her eyes swept over Martha with the clinical assessment of a buyer examining merchandise, then moved to Silas with barely concealed surprise. Your Grace, she said to Silas, her curtsy precise. I did not expect you to accompany Martha. The invitation was for her alone. The Duchess and I are a partnership, Lady Grey, Silas said coolly. Where she is summoned, I attend. I trust that is not inconvenient. It clearly was, but Lady Eleanor recovered smoothly. Of course not. How delightful. Please sit. My son will be joining us shortly. Martha had not seen her brother Edmund in over a year. He arrived moments later, looking uncomfortable in evening dress, his cravat tied awkwardly. He had their father's kind eyes and weak chin, and had always been more interested in his botanical sketches than in society. He offered Martha a tentative smile that she returned with genuine warmth. Martha? I mean, Your Grace. You look well? As do you, Edmund. How are your studies? Fascinating, actually. I have been documenting variations in—" He stopped as their mother cleared her throat sharply. "But perhaps that is not appropriate dinner conversation." They sat. Soup was served, and Lady Eleanor began her campaign. "I have been receiving visits all week," she said, her tone light but edged. Lady Pemberton, the Countess of Hertford, even Lady Rothwell herself, all eager to discuss the Duchess of Morningwell's dramatic appearance at the salon. She sipped her wine delicately. "You caused quite the spectacle, Martha." "I spoke honestly," Martha said. "If honesty is spectacle, the fault lies with those who prefer comfortable lies." "You aired private medical information in a public setting," Lady Eleanor countered. "You made yourself a topic of gossip." "You made me a topic of gossip," Martha corrected. "When you announced my barrenness to a room full of strangers, I merely refused to be shamed by it." Edmund shifted uncomfortably. Silas remained still, but Martha felt his presence beside her like a steady flame. Lady Eleanor set down her wineglass with precision. "I am trying to help you, Martha, to manage the narrative before it destroys what little social standing you have gained through this marriage. The Ton is whispering about you, about your condition, about whether the Duke married you out of pity or convenience." "Let them whisper," Martha said. "You do not understand the damage." "No, Mother, you do not understand." Martha set down her own glass, meeting her mother's eyes directly. "I am not ashamed, not of my body, not of my marriage, not of who I have become, and I will not allow you to make me ashamed." "Who you have become?" Lady Eleanor's voice sharpened. "You have become exactly what I warned against. A woman too educated for her own good, too opinionated, too proud of abilities that serve no practical purpose. You debate philosophy while your womb sits empty. You tend gardens when you should be managing a nursery. You have forgotten your fundamental purpose." "My fundamental purpose," Martha said, her voice rising despite her intention to remain calm, "was never to be a vessel for someone else's heir. I am not a commodity, not breeding stock, not a failed investment requiring management. You are my daughter." "I am the Duchess of Morningwell," Martha interrupted. "And I was chosen for my spirit, not my utility, for my mind, not my womb, by a man who values what I can give rather than mourning what I cannot." Lady Eleanor's face flushed. "Chosen? You were disposed of, Martha, to a dying man who required a wife who would expect nothing. Do not romanticize a transaction into a love match." "It was not a love match," Silas said quietly, speaking for the first time since the soup course. Every eye turned to him. "When I married Martha, I expected a quiet companion for my final months. Someone to fade into the walls of Morningwell and require nothing of me. Your assessment of the arrangement was entirely correct, Lady Grey." Martha felt something cold settle in her stomach. But Silas continued, his eyes never leaving Lady Eleanor's face. "What I did not expect," he said, "was to find a woman of extraordinary intelligence and courage. Someone who could argue Darwin with Cambridge scholars and coax life from frozen ground. Someone who saw me not as a dying duke, but as a man still capable of living." His voice softened, and he turned to look at Martha. "You sent me a daughter you deemed worthless. You gave me the greatest gift of my life." The silence in the dining room was absolute. Even the servants had stopped moving. "Martha was chosen," Silas continued, turning back to Lady Eleanor. "Not in the transaction you arranged, but in every moment since. I choose her intelligence over heirs, her companionship over dynasty, her spirit over every expectation society places on a duchess. His voice hardened. And if you cannot see her value, cannot recognize the extraordinary woman you birthed, then you are as blind as you are cruel. Lady Eleanor had gone pale, 2 spots of color high on her cheeks. How dare you? How dare I speak truth? Silas's eyebrow arched. I am a dying man, Lady Grey. I have no patience left for polite fictions. Your daughter is remarkable. That you spent 22 years trying to convince her otherwise is a tragedy. That you continue to try is unforgivable. Edmund cleared his throat nervously. Mother, perhaps we should— Be silent, Edmund, Lady Eleanor snapped. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I invited you here, Martha, to offer guidance, to help you navigate society despite your limitations, to salvage what can be salvaged of your reputation. I do not need salvaging, Martha said, standing as well. I need nothing from you, Mother. Not your guidance, not your management, not your assessment of my worth. I need you to stop, Martha said, and her voice broke slightly. To stop measuring me against an impossible standard. To stop reducing me to what I cannot give. To stop punishing me for being exactly who I am. Lady Eleanor's expression flickered, something like pain crossing her face before the mask of control returned. I am your mother. Everything I have done has been for your benefit. To secure your future. To protect you from the consequences of your defects. My defects? Martha laughed, bitter. Or my refusal to be what you wanted? A beautiful daughter who could make a brilliant match? A perfect vessel for grandchildren you could parade through society? She moved around the table, closing the distance between them. I am sorry I disappointed you, Mother. Sorry I was not born with the body or face or temperament you required. But I am not sorry for who I became despite you. Martha, I was chosen for my spirit, Martha repeated, her voice steady now, by a man who was also declared useless by his family, who was told his only purpose was to produce heirs and die efficiently when he failed. We found each other in that exile you sentenced us to, and we built something more valuable than any dynasty. We built a life where we matter, where our minds and hearts and spirits are enough. Tears threatened, but Martha blinked them back. So no, Mother. I will not be ashamed. I will not be managed. I will not allow you to narrate my worth ever again. I am the Duchess of Mourningwell. I am a scholar, a gardener, a wife. And that is enough. I am enough. The silence stretched. Lady Eleanor's hands trembled slightly before she clasped them together, regaining control. You are being hysterical. I am being honest, Martha corrected. Perhaps for the first time in my life with you. She turned to Edmund, who sat frozen, his eyes wide. It was good to see you, brother. You are always welcome at Grosvenor Square if you wish to discuss your botanical studies. I have a conservatory you might find interesting. Then she took Silas's offered arm and walked toward the door. If you leave now, Lady Eleanor said, her voice sharp with something that might have been panic, do not expect to be welcomed back. Martha paused at the threshold. For a moment, she considered turning back, offering some conciliatory word. Years of training urged her to smooth over the conflict, to be a good daughter, to accept her mother's version of love, even if it felt like poison. Instead, she said quietly, I stopped expecting welcome from you years ago, Mother. I stopped expecting love. I only expected judgment, and that you have provided in abundance. She looked back one final time. I hope one day you understand what you lost when you reduced me to my womb. But I will not wait for that day. I have a life to live. And she walked out of her mother's house for the last time. In the carriage, rain drumming on the roof, Silas pulled her close. Martha let herself weep finally, not from sorrow but from the strange relief of severing a bond that had only ever caused pain. You were magnificent, Silas whispered into her hair. I was terrified, Martha admitted. Courage and terror often arrive together, he said. You chose courage. Martha lifted her head, meeting his eyes in the dim carriage light. You said I was the greatest gift of your life. I meant it. Even though I cannot give you children? Even though our line ends with us? Silas cupped her face gently. Especially because of that, we are freed from dynasty, freed to simply be, to love without purpose beyond the loving. His thumb brushed away her tears. You are not a gift because of what you provide, Martha. You are a gift because of who you are. And there, in the rain-soaked darkness, Martha finally believed it. She was enough. She had always been enough. She just needed different eyes to see it. The Hastings Ball was the culmination of the London season. The event where reputations were made or shattered, where society rendered its final verdicts on the year's crop of debutantes and returned émigrés. It was also, Martha knew, the ultimate test. Lady Rothwell's salon had been one thing, intimate and intellectual. Her mother's dining room another, private and painful. But the Hastings Ball was the full theater of the ton. 300 of London's elite gathered to observe, judge, and dissect. Silas had been planning their appearance for weeks with the strategic precision of a general preparing for battle. Not because he craved society's approval, but because he wanted to give Martha what had been stolen from her. The chance to be seen, celebrated, recognized as something other than a beautiful failure. You do not have to do this, Martha told him the morning of the ball, as Dr. Mallory completed his weekly examination. She had seen the toll London was taking, the fatigue that came from late nights and social exertion, the way his breathing grew labored after even mild activity. We could return to mourning well, to the gardens, to our library. Silas buttoned his shirt with trembling fingers, waving away the doctor's concern. We will return, he said, after tonight. After London sees what I see when I look at you. And what is that? Martha asked. He smiled, that slow, warm expression that still made her heart stutter. Everything. By evening, the Ravenel townhouse was in controlled chaos. Agnes had outdone herself with Martha's preparation, dressing her in a gown of deep midnight blue silk that seemed to capture starlight in its folds. The bodice was embroidered with silver thread in patterns that resembled constellations, and the full skirts moved like water. Catherine's sapphires glittered at Martha's throat and wrists. But Silas had added something new, a tiara that had belonged to his grandmother. Delicate silver filigree set with small diamonds that caught the light like ice. You look like a night sky, Silas said when she descended the stairs. He stood in the entrance hall in full evening dress. And though he was thinner than any man should be, though he leaned heavily on an ebony walking stick, there was something in his bearing that commanded attention. Pride, purpose, love barely contained. The word had not been spoken between them, not explicitly, but it hummed in the air whenever they were together, in the way his eyes followed her across a room, in the way her heart lifted when he laughed, in the quiet intimacy of their companionship. Love that had grown from recognition, from being truly seen. You look like a duke, Martha replied, adjusting his cravat with familiar tenderness. My duke. His hand covered hers, holding it against his chest, where she could feel his heart beating. "I need you to know," he said quietly. "Whatever happens tonight, whatever they say or think or whisper, you have already won. You have already proven them wrong. You are remarkable, Martha, with or without their approval." "I know," she said, and meant it. The woman who had left London in November would have needed that reassurance desperately. The woman who stood here now, forged in the sanctuary of Mourningwell and the fires of her mother's judgment, knew her worth independent of society's verdict. But it would still be satisfying to show them. The Hastings residence blazed with light, music spilling from the open doors into the warm June night. Their carriage joined the queue of vehicles depositing London's finest onto the red carpet. When their turn came, the footman opened the door and Silas descended first, then turned to hand Martha down. The moment felt suspended, crystalline. Martha in midnight blue and diamonds, Silas pale but upright beside her, both of them defying every prediction that had been made about their marriage. They should have been a dying duke and his invisible nurse, counting down final months in rural isolation. Instead, they were partners, equals, walking into the heart of society together. The announcement of their arrival cut through the ballroom chatter like a bell. His Grace the Duke of Mourningwell, and Her Grace the Duchess of Mourningwell. The crowd parted, conversations faltered, and Martha felt the weight of 300 pairs of eyes cataloging every detail, her gown, her jewels, Silas's presence at her side when he should have been dying. The whispers started immediately, a susurration like wind through leaves. "She is not as plain as Lady Grey suggested. He looks surprisingly well for a man supposedly at death's door. The sapphires are the late Duchess's," such a statement. "Did you hear what she said at Lady Rothwell's? About her barrenness? Scandalous. Bold. Rather magnificent, actually." Lady Hastings greeted them warmly, her eyes sharp with curiosity, but her manners impeccable. "Your Graces, what a triumph to have you here. The season has been terribly dull until your arrival." They were swept into the current of the ball. Introductions and conversations, dances forming and reforming. Silas could not dance, his strength insufficient for the exertion. But he remained at Martha's side as various gentlemen requested her hand for country dances and waltzes. Each time, before she accepted, she glanced at Silas. Each time, he nodded his permission with a smile that said he was secure in her return. She danced with Lord Ashford, who wanted to discuss crop rotation techniques she had implemented at Mourningwell. With Professor Hartley, who begrudgingly admitted her arguments about women's rational capacity had merit. With Edmund, who appeared nervous but asked shyly about visiting the conservatory. And through it all, across the ballroom floor, her eyes found Silas, watching her, not with possession, but with wonder, as if he could not quite believe she was real. It was near midnight when the music shifted. The orchestra beginning the opening strains of a waltz. Martha had just returned from a quadrille, flushed and breathless, when Silas stood from his chair near the windows. The movement drew attention, the sick Duke rising when he should have been preserving his strength. He crossed the floor to where Martha stood, his walking stick tapping against marble, every step deliberate. The crowd watched, curious and hushed. When he reached her, he extended his hand. "I believe," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "I must dance with my wife." Martha's breath caught. "Silas, you should not. Your strength, I have preserved my strength all evening for precisely this moment," he said. His eyes held hers, intense and determined. "Let me honor you properly. Let me show them what they failed to see. Martha placed her hand in his, and they moved to the center of the floor. The crowd parted, creating space. The orchestra played, and the dying Duke of Mourningwell waltzed with his Barren bride while London watched. His steps were careful, conserving energy, but his posture was perfect. His hand at her waist was steady despite its tremor, and the way he looked at her, with reverence and joy and undisguised love, transformed the dance into something sacred. "You are staring," Martha whispered. "I am memorizing," Silas corrected. "Every detail. The way the candlelight catches in your hair, the color in your cheeks, the happiness in your eyes. This moment, when the woman society declared worthless, is the most radiant creature in the room." "I am not." "You are," he interrupted gently. "Not because of the gown or the jewels or even the defiance, though that is magnificent, but because you are finally, completely yourself. A soul recognized, and there is no beauty greater than that." Martha felt tears threaten, but refused to let them fall. Not here, not now. Instead, she smiled and let herself be swept through the waltz, held by a man who should have been dying, but had chosen to live. For her, with her. The music ended. Applause rippled through the ballroom, genuine, warm, tinged with something like awe. And in the center of the floor, Silas bowed over Martha's hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles that felt like a vow. Around them, the whispers resumed. But they had changed. "Did you see the way he looks at her? I heard she saved his life, brought him back from the edge. She is rather extraordinary, actually. Not classically beautiful, but something better. The Barren Duchess who made the dying Duke want to live. Quite the love story. I would give anything for a marriage like that." And Martha heard them, heard the envy in their voices, the longing. These women with their perfect wombs and dynasties, who had everything society valued, envying what she and Silas had built from the ruins of expectation. Later, in the carriage ride home, Silas collapsed against the seat with exhaustion. Martha held him, his head resting on her shoulder, his breathing labored but steady. "Worth it?" she asked. "Every moment," he whispered. "Did you see their faces? Did you hear them?" "I heard," Martha said. "You are the envy of London," he said. "The barren bride who was married off to a dying duke, who was supposed to fade into walls and wait for widowhood. Instead, you became the most envied woman in the city. Not for your jewels or title, but because you are loved completely, seen fully, valued absolutely." "As are you," Martha said. "The sick duke who was supposed to die efficiently, who instead chose to live magnificently." He lifted his head, meeting her eyes in the darkness. "I love you, Martha. I should have said it weeks ago, months ago. But I am saying it now. I love you. Not despite your barrenness, but including it. All of you. Every part." "I love you," Martha whispered back. "Not despite your illness, but because of who you are within it. The man who saw me when no one else would." He kissed her then, gentle and deep, a promise and a celebration. And when they arrived at Grosvenor Square, he carried her over the threshold despite Agnes's protests and his own exhaustion, laughing at the absurdity and romance of it. That night, in the Duchess's chambers that had finally become truly hers, Martha stood at the window, watching dawn break over London. Silas slept peacefully, the ball's exertion finally catching up. She wore his ring and Catherine's sapphires, and the knowledge that she was loved not for what she could give, but for who she was. The Barren daughter married to the dying duke, who had given each other the greatest gift possible, recognition, and in being seen had finally learned to see themselves, not as failures, but as enough, more than enough, everything. My lovely family, before you go, if you've watched Martha go from her mother's worthless daughter to the most envied woman in London, and felt something shift in your chest, that's not an accident. Subscribe, because I only create stories about women who refuse to be broken by the world's cruelty. Like this video if you believe recognition matters more than perfection. And share it with someone who needs to remember they were never the problem. The mirror was just lying. These stories only reach the people who need them if you help. Be the reason someone else finds their way here. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another powerful story from our channel. Click it and let yourself be surprised by even more unforgettable emotions with love. The Victorian Royal Stories team.